Well, good morning, everyone. We're continuing in our series and actually concluding it here this morning. It's entitled The Time of Your Life, various life stages, and looking at that thematically through events that are markers in our lives and just comparing that to our spiritual condition and seeing how there's a correlation in all of that. Today, as has been mentioned, we're talking about a funeral. And that might be kind of weird for you to have a funeral service when you're not actually at a funeral service. I know actually I took a lot of abuse in the 920 service, particularly for being here today in a suit. That made some people really shocked. So I'll be available for photos following this service if you want to. Just kidding. So this is a bit of a shocker for some, and I think fittingly enough, probably just a little bit of a shocker, and intentionally so, just the subject matter today. A good time for us to reflect, because typically we only think about life and what's beyond life at a funeral. And it's good for us to contemplate that and be mindful of that at other times in our lives as well. And so we're going to do that and just really evaluate the importance and the significance of living a life in a great way. And so today we are here to celebrate and remember the life of you. Because the reality is we all pass away. Unless circumstantially the Lord returns before we die. And so with us all experiencing that or recognizing that there is life after this life, and it is eternal. And so we're going to look at that eternal piece first and foremost, because that's pretty enduring, something that's eternal, and so that's significant, that matters, it's forever. And so what do we do with forever? We need to look at that. We'll also take some time to evaluate what kind of legacy we want to leave behind, recognizing that between birth and death, there's this part in the middle that is called this life. So how do we live that well and set ourselves up for something that is eternal? Well, we'll look at that in a secondary way. And just by way of introduction, it's something that we wanted to say, and we were just really sensitive of that, even in the context of this morning, recognizing that a day like today, with this subject matter, this would be something that would be hard for a number of you who are here. And circumstantially, and you've just experienced loss personally, and maybe that's been recent, maybe that's really fresh, maybe even just being here today with this topic will be really hard for you. And we're aware of that, and what we take comfort in is knowing that God's aware of it too. And it's just our prayer, and we'll pray to this end in a moment's time, that you would just find healing in the midst of today's hurt, however that is defined for you. And so let's look to God now as we just tackle this whole topic this morning of just evaluating our lives and making sure that they're significant. Bow with me in a word of prayer. Father, I would just ask that you would help us today through maybe a topic that's a little heavier, subject matter that we don't really often think about unless we happen to be at a funeral. But Lord, something that we should contemplate maybe more often than we do. And so God, I thank you for the gift of that opportunity here today. And I would just ask, Lord, that we wouldn't squander it, but that we would just really take seriously what your word has to say to us in terms of what this life offers and what's offered beyond this life. And Lord, that we just need to recognize the significance of the correlation there and make sure that we're acting and being in the best possible way that we can be in the best condition to set ourselves up for success eternally. And so go with us in that. Father, I go with those who are here today, and as your word says, you are close to the brokenhearted. And I just pray that that song would bring comfort and healing for those who right now are experiencing the hurt and the loss of a loved one, or where this whole topic of a funeral brings up pain in their minds right now. And so God, would you just minister to them in a way that only you can, and may they just find you today in a deep and meaningful way. And so I offer that to you as well. Go with us, God, I pray in your name. Amen. The first aspect here this morning is just the recognition that we really have to be alive when we die. That's something that's important, and it's stressed to us in Scripture. Matthew chapter 24, verses 42 through 51. Jesus is sharing that, and he did this by way of parables. These were stories that basically had a spiritual component attached to them, And Jesus just found a way to storytell where he made it relatable to a life event that people understood. And there would be parallels that would just point to God and make God a little more real and personal for people understanding him and processing him for the very first time. And so that's what Jesus is doing here, and he's talking about a master and a master's servants, and outlining a scenario for us here. And so we'll pick up Jesus' words in verse 42. And he says this, "So you too must keep watch, for you don't know what day your Lord is coming. Understand this. If a homeowner knew exactly when a burglar was coming, he would keep watch and not permit his house to be broken into. You must also be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected. A faithful, sensible servant is one to whom the master can give the responsibility of managing his other household servants and feeding them. If the master returns and finds that the servant has done a good job, there will be a reward. And I tell you the truth, the master will put that servant in charge of all he owns. But what if the servant is evil and thinks, my master won't be back for a while? And he begins beating the other servants, partying and getting drunk. The master will return unannounced and unexpected, and he will cut the servant to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. And in that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So this is a story that maybe many of us have heard before, but I think it serves us well just to go through a few definitions here this morning and just really underscore what Jesus is saying and the significance of this particular parable. And in this story, who is the master? So a show of hands if you would agree that the correct answer on that is with this imagery that the master in this story is God. Okay? Right? Okay, so we understand that and we know that reading this story. Who is the servant in the parable? Right, you guys are us, right? Followers of Christ. Servants of God. So Christians are the servants in this story. What kind of servants are talked about in this parable? Good ones and not so good ones. In fact, this translation says evil servants. Okay, evil Christians is how that translates. What happens to the bad Christians? Well, they're cut to pieces and thrown where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Translation, they're sent to hell. And so that's the story. And it sounds a little bit more abrupt when we actually define it out, because usually we just kind of hear it as a parable or it's a story and it's out there and it's masters and slaves, and we don't have that today. And we just hear the story and we just think, oh yeah, okay, be a good Christian and move along. But this is how it's defined for us, and it flies in the face of our North American church culture, or maybe our theological slant, or what we're accustomed to. We read this parable, but we don't really believe it per se, or maybe even take it to heart. We've just heard it so many times, and we think it's for other people, but not possibly us. And we've just kind of climatized ourselves in such a way where it's like, well, all Christians get in. I said a prayer, right? So I'm good. And we just find in this, God's word is actually God himself. The Bible is God-inspired. That means those words are breathed by God. When you're reading the Bible, you're seeing who God is. And so this is God saying this to us. God and his word are one and the same. It's true, therefore. And truth doesn't change. What we know about something that doesn't change is that that's enduring, that's eternal, that will always be the same. So, with that backdrop, if there were good and bad servants or followers of Jesus in Jesus' day, while he's sharing the story, there are good and bad servants now. Which leads me to asking you to answer this question and to do so in a way that's objective. Do you know any bad Christians right now? I say objectively because ironically, here's what happens. People who actually are bad Christians think that good Christians are bad, right? That's what happens. And then those of us who are good Christians, obviously we know who the bad ones are, right? That's just kind of what happens. and of course, you and I are all good Christians. It's always someone else who are the bad ones. And that's why I'm just stressing to answer it objectively. Because the point here this morning isn't to flag who is good or bad among us. It's just to consider whether or not you actually believe that there is a distinction between a good and a bad Christian. And again, we don't really think about it in those terms. We just think we're a Christian, we're good. And yet experientially, we bump up against this all the time. We bump into other Christians who, when we look at that, we just say, wow, I'm not sure that that's Christ-like. That seems bad to me. And we fail in those ways too. We can be that. And so if you know some bad ones, the answer to do you know of any bad questions, or Christians, the answer to that question is, well, yeah, I do. So today you can look at the Bible, and through answering that question just based on your personal experience right now, you can see that, surprise, surprise, the Bible is true. You know, that experientially I know this, that what Jesus has just finished sharing, it is still true today. So here's the thought bubble that you and I should be having right now. If through this parable I realize that there are bad Christians, and we see in the story that bad things happen to bad Christians, then maybe I need to take a closer look at whether or not I'm a bad Christian. Because that matters for all of eternity. And that leads us to the second concept of the importance of finishing well. Because we never know when we're finished. We don't know when the end is for us. Or we don't know when it's our funeral. Came across the story, someone had actually emailed it to me a while ago, and it fit really well in the context of this point specifically, and it was just titled The Magic Bank Account. Maybe you've come across this as well, but I'll just take a quick moment to read through it. And it says this: imagine that you had won the following prize in a contest. Each morning your bank would deposit $86,400 in your own account for only your use. It was personalized for you. However, this prize has rules. And here's the set of rules. First of all, everything that you didn't spend during each day would be taken away from you at the end of the day, okay? So you had to spend it because it would be taken away at the end of the day. Secondly, you couldn't simply transfer the money into another account. So you couldn't take what was left and dump it into another account. It was just stuck in this one. You can spend it. That's the third rule. That's a good one. Spend this money. Only you may spend it. Each morning, the fourth thing, upon awakening, the bank opens your account with another $86,400 for that day. So it replenishes, it reloads every day. Fifth, the bank can end the game without warning at any time. It can say game over. It can close the account and you will not receive a new one. So what would you personally do? And then it goes on to suggest what you and I would do with that kind of a prize. You would buy anything and everything you wanted. Not only for yourself, but for all the people you love and care for. Even for people you don't know. Because you couldn't possibly spend it all on yourself. And I thought of that, I'm like, well, I'd probably take a pretty good run at that for a week or so, but maybe after you would start leaking towards some others once you'd gotten all the vehicles you could possibly accumulate or whatever it would be for you. And you'd start having that disperse amongst others and just sharing that wealth. You would spend every penny and you would use it all because you knew it would be replenished in the morning. And then it goes on to say, actually, this game is real. Each of us is already a winner of this unique prize. We just can't seem to see it. The prize is time. Each morning we awaken to receive 86,400 seconds as a gift of life. And when we go to sleep at night, any remaining time is not credited to us. What we haven't used up that day is forever lost. Yesterday is gone forever. Each morning the account is refilled, but the bank can dissolve your account at any time without warning. So what will you do with your 86,400 seconds? Those seconds are worth so much more than the same amount in dollars. And I heard that, and then you've gotten these emails too, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, right. I knew that this would be the punchline, and yeah, time is more valuable than money. But just let that really sink in. I mean, if you had the money but you weren't alive, it's useless. And I mean, it is so true, and I think we can, again, just take for granted the gift of life and just living every second of it. And then the email just continued, think about it. Remember to enjoy every second of your life because time races by so much quicker than you think. So take care of yourself, be happy, love deeply, and enjoy life. Here's wishing you a wonderful and beautiful day. Start spending. And I thought of it as well, in just the words of the book of Job, chapter 14, verse 5 came to mind, and they say this, a person's days are determined. God has decreed the number of his months, and he's set limits that he cannot exceed. And so your life and mine, in essence, they're not our own. I mean, I can't control when I die. I wish I could. I can't control how old I get or physical ailments, as life goes on. I wish that I could manage that. And we can do some things, but really at the end of it, God's in control of that, and he has our days numbered. Last week we looked at David's final words to his son Solomon as he was nearing the end of his life. And a chapter later we see not only his final words to Solomon, but we see his final words to God, at least his final words to the Lord while he was here on earth. And they're beautiful words, and I'm going to have us look at those in a moment's time, and it's just entitled David's Prayer of Praise, what we see in Scripture at this time in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 13 through 18. And this would be, I would just encourage you, think on these words. This would be a great way to go out, to have the heart of David and just to be able to declare this at the end of our lives. Oh, our God, we thank you and we praise your glorious name. But who am I and who are my people that we could give anything to you? Everything we have has come from you when we give you only what you first gave us. We are here for only a moment, visitors and strangers in the land as our ancestors were before us. Our days on earth are like a passing shadow, gone so soon without a trace. O Lord our God, even this material we have gathered to build a temple to honor your holy name comes from you. It all belongs to you. I know, my God, that you examine our hearts and rejoice when you find integrity there. You know I have done all this with good motives, and I have watched your people offer their gifts willingly and joyously. O Lord, the God of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, make your people always want to obey you. See to it that their love for you never changes. And again, what a wonderful way to go out. What a legacy. What kind of a funeral service will you have? What will your eulogy look like? The only parts that matter or last are the things done with God attached. That's it. And David got that. And even here on his deathbed, he's thinking about the spiritual well-being of those around him. And that's what he's burdened with. And he's wanting God to be glorified and worshiped. That's it. And that's what mattered most to him. Just with the whole concept of a funeral, as I think of my life, and specifically in the context of thinking of ministry, the worst part of ministry, like if you were to ask me what's the worst part of ministry, the thing that you hate the most, this is an easy answer for me. I mean, it's not even close. Number one on the list for me, the worst thing, the thing that tanks me, the worst possible day for me is when I'm conducting a funeral service, and in the process of that funeral happens to be nothing more than storytelling. That's the worst day. And I go home messed up from that. Because there's no spiritual life to point to one's life, and it's just so empty. What's actually even harder is when the person was actually even well-liked or loved or a good person or had quote-unquote accomplished things. That's even harder in a weird way, because the futility of that just stands again in stark contrast to what their eternity will end up being. And it hurts. And the point is this, it's that we don't stay in this. This casket isn't the end. That's not where things finish off. There's forever after that happens. And so spiritual life is really, really significant. And it's great when it's a funeral service and someone recognized that personally and they made a decision to give their all to God, and I can stand before people and let everyone know that the person who has left us here is with God now forever. And that's a good thing, and we celebrate. Those funerals, those are good ones. Those days are better, and that feels good. There is more, and it is forever. It's with God eternally or without him forever, which would be hell. And fittingly enough, it actually is. That's the other option. Hell is literally an eternity without God. God is not there. And the truth this morning is this: you get to decide what kind of funeral you'll have. I don't decide that. God gives you the freedom to make that call. And I would just encourage you, work towards a legacy today that you will want for all of eternity. And so, again, these 86,400 seconds today matter forever. Today's not just another Sunday. We can even practically apply it to the 5 weeks that we've just spent together here. And it's been actually really cool to reflect on that in the context of preparing for today, just to see the gift of what God has orchestrated in piecing this together. You know, just this whole idea of even just a general eulogy that would go something like this. Over these past 5 weeks, these past 5 Sundays here, we've looked at our lives from birth to death. And it's really good to contemplate that. Here we are by way of application. The whole theme of a birthday. On September 7th, 5 weeks ago, some of you raised your hand for the very first time and said, you know what, I need this whole concept of being born again, this spiritual birth, I need this. Some of you came, you received the gift, you took home a Bible, you started that journey. September 7th was a good day for you. Your funeral looks better as a result of your decision that you made there. Graduation was the next week, and so we moved and transitioned from talking about spiritual life to talking about spiritual growth. You realized and recognized and were encouraged on that day to take your faith seriously, to grow in your walk with your God, you know, to graduate, to move towards something, to get a diploma, to look at your life a year from now and see whether or not there was any spiritual growth at all. So that was the encouragement there. With the whole concept and the theme of wedding, we just recognized our spiritual connection, you know, and how God, through imagery in the Bible, talks about a wedding and how he is married to the church. He's the groom, and we as followers of him are the bride, and we're preparing ourselves for him. We were encouraged to make church a priority and small groups and community a priority, to love on one another and care for each other. That was the whole concept of wedding. And last weekend, anniversary, we moved from spiritual connection and just recognized the importance of spiritual commitment. And here too, that's when we just have the spiritual maturity to recognize that it's not all about you, it's not all about me. And we love and we serve God, not only by loving and serving him, but by loving and serving others. And the challenge was to just make sure that your faith is active and real and on display, that you make a difference in your world, whether that's your school environment or work, you know, in your neighborhood, in the world around you or the world at large. That was just the encouragement for us. And that brings us to this morning. And as we reflect on a funeral, you know, we just recognize that if all this other stuff is in play and then we're pursuing God hard, we end up with a spiritual reward. He'll say, you finished well. Matthew 25, verse 23, well done, my good and faithful servant. I know that for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we want to hear him say that of us. And so this series has just helped us to process whether or not we will. And all of this is only made possible because of the cross. And fittingly enough, we get to celebrate that today. On display in this communion setting and with this communion table is the ultimate funeral. Nothing will ever usurp this from being the most significant death, because this one had resurrection attached to it. And that's absolutely incredible, and it was done for us. It was someone who died who physically was capable of never dying, and yet he chose to. It was undeserved, but it was done for you and I. It was done out of love so that you and I wouldn't die, so that we would live eternally. And that's Jesus. That's the story of the cross. And we're thankful for that. There's a story that I want to share just as we gather around the communion table, and it'll transition us a little bit now. And just to set this story up a little bit, how I came across it was we were on our way on a holiday as a family. It was the summer months. This was going back 2 summers ago. And I picked up a rock on our travels. I was driving. And I'm like, how did that happen? Like, that's crazy. I wasn't driving too close to a vehicle, and so I took the rock and I thought, oh man, if only I was driving closer to it, maybe it wouldn't have happened, right? And so I was a safe enough distance away, wasn't following behind a Sammy, it was just a regular vehicle. I wasn't expecting to get a rock chip, and I did. So we ended up at our destination, just kind of got settled in, and then I just took a drive around the city and found a place where I could go and get the rock chip repaired. Was sitting in the lobby, just waiting for that to happen. Wasn't going to take too long. Got a little bored, flipped open a magazine that I would not subscribe to. It was boring. Can't remember what it was specifically, but it was probably, well, I won't throw out any names because that'd be horrible for whoever the magazine is, but that's something I want to be interested in, right? So I'm just flipping through the pages of a boring magazine, and I came across this article which actually caught my attention and really, really struck me. And what was cool about that is I started reading it, and it's like, God, I know why I got the rock chip. It was for this one page in this magazine at this particular moment. It was an article entitled Joining the Grief Club, Observations on a Painful Initiation, written by a lady named Shelley Wood. And I won't take the time to read all of the article, but I will share portions of it with you, and you'll just hear her heart through her words. And she starts off by saying this: previously unaware of its existence, and without actively applying for membership, I've joined the Grief Club. My mother recently died, and in so doing, swept me into a gentle and eclectic group I'd never before appreciated. And then she went on and described her mom a little bit and how special her mom was to her, and then continues on to the response of her peer group. She says, that's where the Grief Club made itself known. Some emailed. A handful called the instant they heard the news, and they kept calling until I picked up. One cooked me a mac and cheese. Many must have found themselves in that alien section of the stationery store trying to find a not too sappy condolences card so that they could let me know they were sad and worried. But others just messaged me on Facebook, or sent a text thinking of you, or worse, astonished me with silence. I can't help but rank these efforts, the gone out of their ways, down to the no-shows. Across the board, those who knew the right words and deeds have been those who themselves have already endured this kind of impossible goodbye. And then she goes on and transitions in another moment. She's talking about an experience where she says, the kicker was on a flight home from a business trip, my first week back. She encountered this, and she said, I'm fragile at altitude at the best of times, but anguish hit somewhere over the Atlantic and I came undone. People have told me grief comes in waves. My experience has been that it's more like a spray of bullets. One of the flight attendants rushed over, asked me what was wrong, and it bubbled out of me like lava. She crouched on my seat, her eyes welling up. And she told me she buried her mother the year before, age 56. It was the hardest day of my life, she said, and it still is. Then she stayed at my side and talked to me, asked me what my mom was like, told me about hers, assured me that the nightmares I'm having now will turn into joyful dreams in time. Later in the flight, she brought me ice cream. And then she concludes, she says this, and now I'm in a card-carrying member. I wouldn't wish the Grief Club on anyone. But as a friend pointed out, everyone's mother dies. Mine just died too early. And then this sentence really struck me. It's quite profound. whoever's next in my circle, I'll be there. And just experientially, I thought that was really powerful, just her way of saying, man, I get this now. And, I won't be silent. And it just really struck me in the context of even for us here this morning. You and I don't have to experience the loss of a mother to care for someone who lost theirs. On a human level, we can't relate. Experientially, we haven't gone through the pain that they're enduring. But on a spiritual level, we can and we need to care. Because God knows and understands the pain of death like no other person. He grieves that death came into being. Death didn't exist initially. That came as a result of the fall. That came as a result of sin. That wasn't God's intention for death to even exist. So he was pretty sad when death happened. And he recognized the ramifications of death happening. It meant that his son would die so that you and I wouldn't. And there was pain attached to that, and it was unjust. Beyond even just the loss of a loved one, it was undeserved. He grieves death and that it came into being as a result of your sin and mine. It cost him personally to rectify that on our behalf. And the beauty is this, as we come around the Lord's table this morning, as we remember, with Christ in us, our hearts actually align with his, and we can care on the deepest of levels for those around us today. And may that be said of us. May it be said that people are just blown away by how profoundly we care for them, even though we've never lost our mom, but somehow it seems like we understand. May they just see Jesus in us during those moments that are dark for them. And that's something that can only be done because of us having Christ in us and caring and loving in a way that he would want us to. And so there's that opportunity made available to us as we talk about funerals or experience loss. Don't remain silent on that.